Welcome to our discussion on workplace influence, power, and politics. So think of power as the capacity to influence the actions of others. It's obviously linked with leadership, but doesn't necessarily come only with formal leadership within the organization. Okay, so let's talk about the sources of organizational, or also called position power. Legitimate power is the power that comes from the person's formal role or position within the organization, whereas reward power is based on a person's ability to give rewards. So if your manager says, hey, if you do this, I can give you a bonus, or if you do this, it's part of your job and you'll earn your salary, that's reward power. Coercive power, on the other hand, is the ability to take something away if somebody does what they don't want you to do. And so if you get written up because you fall short on job responsibilities, that's a use of coercive power. On the other hand, personal power does not come from a formal position within the organization, and it's centered on the person, him or herself. So we have several different kinds. Expert power, which comes from specific knowledge and skill. So a person who is an expert on IT has power because of their ability to help people with their IT problems, for instance. Information power is different than expert power. It comes from access to specific information that other people might not have access to. And then finally, referent power is how much a person is liked and respected. So looking at position power again, think about what pitfalls you might encounter if you relied on the authority of your position too much to get people to do what you want them to do. Where does relying on formal authority fall short? Think of your own experiences as a manager or as a subordinate. On the other hand, what are some instances where you have experienced it's difficult to exercise your authority enough? So when we think about using our formal or position power, we're really talking about managing down the hierarchy. And some things to keep in mind is that you have to earn the right to your employees' respect. So that means if you make promises, you need to keep them. Use ethical judgment. So use your actions for the greater good. Use your formal power sparingly. Don't rely on it. And involve others in your decision making. When are some times when it's absolutely necessary to exercise your formal authority? Maybe when you have to make a quick decision, or maybe when the group has struggled to reach an agreement. Maybe when there are specific standards or norms that are not negotiable, or maybe when you need to set boundaries, or maybe when you need to refocus people's attention on what's important. Now we're going to talk about some different sources of influence. And by influence, I'm really talking more about power over peers, or managing side to side. So we're going to talk about a case study that was conducted by a networks researcher at a company that we'll call Silicon Systems. So basically, this was a communication systems company. This was well before the cloud existed. This was way back in the 90s. And Silicon Systems basically created and installed communication systems for their clients. One of their installers contacted the Communication Workers of America, or CWA, to bring the union into Silicon Systems. When a union is deciding whether they're going to attempt a union drive at a company, they need to know that there is some definite interest in the union. And so Hal got 90% of the installer team to turn in interest cards. Looking at the organizational chart for Silicon Systems, you can see that the folks inside the dotted lines are the installers in the company. And Hal is the lead installer on the biggest installer team. I've circled Hal in red. So the union decided that they needed to have a representative within the company to help with the union drive. And that representative's responsibilities would include getting employees to get behind the idea of the union. So who do you think that CWA chose as their representative? If you guessed Hal, you're absolutely right. So they did choose Hal to be their main representative because he had contacted them. Like I said, he was the lead member of the largest installer team, and he was very enthusiastic for the cause of the union. Based on all of this, would you have chosen Hal? Does it seem like a reasonable choice based on the information that they had? So now I'm going to show you a different picture of the organization. This is what we would call a network map or sociogram, and it's a picture of the friendship network of the organization. So you can see the abbreviations for the people's names, and every line between two people indicates that they both said they considered the other person a friend. The people that are circled are members of the potential bargaining unit. So these guys are members of the installer team. So when you're looking at this network, what are some of the things that you noticed right off? If you said that Hal didn't have a lot of friends, that's absolutely true. Hal had two mutual friendships, one with probably somebody named Fred and then somebody named Carr. If you also notice that Hal was not friends with any of the members of the installer team, you are also correct. Hal didn't have any mutual friendships with any of the other installers. And finally, if you noticed that somebody whose initial or whose name starts with CHR looked to be one of the most popular people on the installer team, you're also absolutely right. That person's name is Chris. And you can see him in the center of this clump of installer friendships. So now that you're looking at this friendship network, would you have chosen Hal to be the main representative for the union? And why or why not? If you said no, then what you're acknowledging is that our friendships, our relationships with people at work are a source of influence over others. And without that friendship connection with other members of the installer team, you're implying that Hal didn't have the level of influence that he needed in order to get the union to be successful at Silicon Systems. And you would be absolutely right. What happened was Hal was not central in the friendship network, no friendship ties with other installers, and Chris, who was that central person in the friendship network, ended up getting pulled in different directions because he didn't have a strong opinion about the union one way or the other, and he was torn. He liked the founder and CEO of the company. He had friends who were both pro-union and anti-union, and when they went to the bar to chat about what they should do, his friends were encouraging him on both sides of the issue. Chris got so stressed out by the whole situation that he decided to quit before the vote so that he wouldn't have to make the choice. And what happened was when Chris left, everybody was totally bummed out. This was their good buddy, and he had decided to leave the company. And basically what happened is that the installers blamed Chris leaving on the union drive, and the union lost by a landslide. Only 3 people voted yes, even though 90% of the installers had expressed interest in the union initially. So when you look at this situation, what we're really talking about is that Chris's influence at Silicon Systems was based not on his competence, not on his expertise, not on his formal position, but 100% on the fact that many of the installers considered him to be a personal friend. So now I want you to read through the scenarios provided in the next several slides and try to decide why you think the person in the scenario said yes. Jot down some notes for yourself because we're going to discuss each one individually. Base it on your personal experience, base it on your own real life experiences, and then jot down some notes about why you think every person in the scenario said yes. All right. So hopefully you jotted down some notes for each scenario, and let's talk about each one. So in the case of the Hare Krishnas, basically what they did was they made their targets feel obligated to return the favor. If they handed you a flower, there became an obligation for you to return the favor in some way. So it was very effective use of a principle of influence called reciprocity. The reality is, in human society, because we're such social creatures, reciprocity is a huge psychological force that exercises on us. And without reciprocity, the whole social fabric would fall apart. So many of us feel this obligation to return a favor, to exercise reciprocity incredibly strongly. The second example where Environment California got me to donate to their cause, you could argue that maybe by using the signing of the petition, they identified people who were interested in the cause in the first place. And I think that's absolutely true. But a more important and stronger force that's working in this situation is the idea of commitment and consistency. So having me sign my signature to say that I cared about this cause was basically me making a commitment to saying that this is important to me. And so then when I was asked later on to show my commitment, I had to go through with it, or I would have been acting inconsistently. And this feeling that we have to be consistent with our beliefs and our commitments is a really strong force that acts on all of us. The third one is something called social proof, which basically argues that if similar people are doing something, it must be an okay thing to do. And it's not the same thing as a celebrity endorsement. Social proof is all about everyday people that are similar to us influencing our actions. Next group of principles of influence, the Pampered Chef Party is based on the principle of liking. So the idea is that the person who holds the party invites friends to the party, and those friends want to do good things for her. They want to help her, and so they're more likely to be influenced in her favor. You could also argue that there's a sense of obligation with these parties because everybody knows that your friend will receive gifts for all the items that are sold at the party. The next one that describes the Milgram experience shows the strength of the principle of authority. You'll notice that the researchers wore white lab coats, and those white lab coats served as a symbol of the authority that they had. And I think that you'll remember that most of the time when you visit the doctor, he or she is wearing a white lab coat as well. So that symbol of authority makes us more respectful and more likely to be influenced by that person. So thinking about the formal authority that your manager has over you, most of us are influenced by our manager pretty strongly. And the interesting thing is that you have to be careful and make sure that you're not caving in on your own principles when your manager asks you to do something that perhaps is less ethical than it should be. And finally, the Air Jordan sneakers are showing us the principle of scarcity. where if something is limited in quantity or not fully available, it makes it that much more attractive. So it's kind of the concept of the doorbusters that retailers will use to get people out to their stores on the Friday after Thanksgiving. They offer an incredible deal, but there's only a limited quantity available. So at work, we can use a number of different tactics to try to influence other people. Some of what we would call maybe soft influence tactics include the items that you see listed on the slide here. And think about if you feel that these tactics are particularly useful for you. Have you used them in the past, or in reading over them right now, do they seem like something reasonable that you would like to consider using? Next, we have a group of what we will call hard influence tactics. These are a little more coercive. They're not quite as rational as appealing to people's better instincts like the soft tactics are. These are kind of pushing people and coercing them to do what you want them to do. And once again, you should read through them, see if any of them sound familiar, like have you done things like this in the past, or do any of them seem like they'd be a good tactic to use? So research has shown that both soft and hard influence tactics can result in people doing what you want them to do. But the interesting thing is that hard influence tactics are more likely to encounter resistance, whereas soft influence tactics often achieve not just compliance, but also commitment. So soft influence tactics are more likely to result in people buying into what you want them to do and really becoming committed to the goal. Now we're going to check out a video here about office politics. We'll talk about that topic in our next slides. So what are office politics? Basically, these are things that organizations not telling anyone to do. Usually people that engage in office politics are trying to maximize their self-interests, and often they're doing this at the expense of other people or the organization itself. So in general, office politics may be effective at getting people to have their own way, but might not be a great long-term solution. So why do people engage in office politics? Well, basically, there's a couple of different things that happen. It could be that there are pressures existing in the organization itself that are creating a sense of fear and self-protection in folks. So if organizations are going through major cost cutting, or there are opportunities for big promotions, or if organizations are facing layoffs, then office politics are more likely to occur. There are also individual factors that influence the likelihood of politics, and this is basically like some folks are just more likely or interested in engaging in office politics through because of different personality factors. So organizations are full of people, and everybody has their own agenda, and everybody has at least a little bit of desire to win power and influence. So corporate politics or office politics is where people are working around instead of through the formal structure. People might manipulate communication channels in the organization to control the flow of information, and the rules of office politics are never openly stated. That they're tacitly understood often, but never openly stated. So being able to navigate office politics, even if you choose not to engage in them yourself, is an important skill to have in the organization. So if you don't understand politics, you're often going to find yourself at a disadvantage. So you at least have to understand it and be able to navigate it if you don't want it to harm your career. So thinking about political skill, There are different ways to approach office politics, and they run the spectrum from being incredibly naive about them to being a political opportunist yourself. And I think that maybe the best thing to do is to strive for the middle of the road, more sensible approach to office politics. Here are a couple of links to articles, and then there's also something called a political skill inventory that you can use to assess your own level of political skill and identify areas where maybe you might want to work on it a little bit more. So there are different levels of political action that you can engage in. You can decide that you are going to pursue your own personal self-interests, and often the sharks are the ones that are most likely to do this. You can decide that there's an issue that's really important to you, and so you want to build a coalition of believers around this issue. And so you want to build a coalition of folks that want to achieve the same goal that you do around that around that single issue. And then finally, you can make sure that you're developing your network carefully so that you can get social support for the general interests of your group. So you can see that individual level political action is often more selfishly motivated, whereas you move up the pyramid, you're getting more to the group level or collective level of action.